I'm putting the final touches on the support board. That would be knocking out a hole for the antenna terminals, and then I'm going to spray the whole thing down with this Rust-Oleum camouflage brown paint. I've used this before. It's very, very non-reflective, as it says. Ultra flat, nice brown color. I think it will match the other brown that's on the interior of the cabinet quite well. So what I did to make this was I penciled out the rectangle, carefully drilled out the corners to give it a nice curved rectangle look, then used my largest bit to make 3 holes down the middle so it's almost all gone, and I'm going to use a hammer and a chisel to square it up now. Here it is after a few coats of that camouflage paint, and I think it looks fine. Now before I install this, I need to rub out the finish on the cabinet, and I got an email with a couple suggestions for some tests to perform on that 6K7, and I figure, well, I got the chassis still out, sure, why not? So the suggestions were to measure the AVC voltage, now with the good tube in there with it working properly, just to get an idea of the range. Generally the comments seem to be that it should run between the bias voltage of around -3 volts, and then it should go more negative on stronger stations up to maybe -6 or 7 volts. So we'll see. Now the other suggestion was to measure the voltage on the grid with the cap taken off, the cap lead. The idea is to see if there's any grid leakage, so I'll do that both with the good tube in here and then the tube that doesn't work so well. I would test for grid leakage on the 600A, but I don't think it has that ability. My Hickok Cardmatic has a great leakage tester, but I don't have a card for the 6K7. First up, with the good tube. Now, I've never actually tried doing this before, so I'm not sure what kind of readings I'm going to get. We shall see. Alright, radio on. Okay, it's going more negative. So with the grid not connected to anything other than through this, which would be a high impedance to ground, I guess the only voltage that would come would be picking up electrons from that cathode, I imagine. I guess this would be like the old grid leak resistors they would use to bias tubes. Alright, looks like we're stabilizing at about negative 0.85 volts, 0.86. Alright, let's try the other tube now. Okay, now the other 6K7. It's also going negative. But considerably more negative. Now, is that indicative of it being leaky? Could be. Except I've never actually tried doing this test before. Also, it takes a few minutes for this tube to really act up, so I'll let this sit a while longer. After a couple minutes, it started dropping back down. So we went from over -1 volt, now we're heading back to towards 0. After about 10 minutes, we're down to -0.344, and it's still continuing to head towards 0. Now, I didn't leave the other tube in. anywhere near as long. So I'm going to put that tube back in and let it sit for 10 minutes just to make sure that we are seeing a significant difference between the two. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes now with the good tube, and it is holding steady right around minus 0.78 volts. I double checked the email that suggested doing this test, and he said, yeah, a climbing grid voltage does indicate leakage. So now I can say, mystery solved, this tube has grid leakage. Alright, now let's see about that AVC voltage with the good tube in there. So right now I'm in between stations, and it's about minus 2.5.
Con esta llamadita aquí que nos están hablando. Oh, perdón. Oh, sí, con esa nueva canción de los cementerios de Nuevo León.
Tune into one of the strongest stations around here, and it dropped to minus 3.7. In other words, it went more negative, which is exactly what it should do. More negative, less gain.
Para todos ustedes, dice así.
It's another strongest station, not more negative. Actually, that's my own transmitter. So again, it goes to about minus 3. And I would imagine if I had an even stronger signal, it would go even more negative. Like, okay, I'll try firing this up. Let's see what happens. Alright, let's see, 1100 and 60 dB. Let's give that a try. There it is. Yeah, definitely going more negative now. Let's go to minus 50 dB. Yeah, okay, it's definitely working right. The stronger the signal, less, the more negative it is. Let's try 40 dB. Alright, cool. So imagine if I had a good antenna and ground setup, I'd be seeing more negative readings with this as well, but I'm satisfied that the AVC is working right. Now that the chassis is done, it's time to put the radio all back together, right? Well, no, not quite. Although I repaired and refinished this cabinet about 3 years ago, it's still not ready. Why? Because I haven't rubbed out the finish yet. So down here you can see where I just sprayed on some gloss lacquer. Final coat, nice and shiny. And sure, you could leave it like this, but in person it looks a little artificial, a little shiny, almost like plastic. What you really want to do to make it look nice and authentic is rub it out, or also known as like knocking the finish down, breaking the finish, I think I've heard it referred to as well. And if you feel this, it feels kind of slippery, kind of nice. But if you were to compare that to how this feels, where I have started rubbing it out, it feels different. This feels like silky. This feels hard and plasticky. This feels real nice. So, how do I do that? Well, in areas where it's really rough after spraying, I'll start out with 600 grit and some water or mineral oil as a lubricant. Once all any like high spots or really rough areas are smoothed down, I switch to pumice. In particular, this stuff, which is 2F, which I think is equivalent to like 1,000 grit, maybe, or thereabouts. I just leaked out of the bag, so it's this fine white powder, and you can use that with a felt block. And again, water or mineral oil. I've used mineral oil in the past, which works fine, but it's a little messy. You gotta clean it up with mineral spirits, paint thinner, including flushing out the block, because eventually this block will start getting all clogged up with both the pumice grit and the lacquer that gets rubbed off, or braided off. Well, I was reading up when I ordered this block, which I got recently, and they said using water is just fine, and it actually makes it easier to flush out the felt block. So I've been using water lately, and it works fine. Just don't let a lot of water get down into like inside the cabinet where there's some raw wood exposed, and you don't want that to get really damp and swell up. So doing a large flat surface like this top here is straightforward. I usually just do this while I'm watching TV. Just sprinkle some of the powder on, dribble some water on, or just dip the felt block in some water and just rub back and forth until it looks like this. And this is what you call satin finish. So even though I used high gloss nitrocellulose lacquer, you can make the finish look like whatever you want by using different grades of abrasive. So right now I could stop, maybe throw a little wax on it and call it done. This is a nice satin finish. I think I'll go one step better though and go to 4F, which will give me a semi-gloss. Now of course you could also buy semi-gloss or satin lacquer and just spray that on. And I certainly have done that on smaller cabinets where it's easier to get a really nice final spray, final coat where it flows out well, no orange peel, no overspray, and good enough where I'll just leave it. But on a larger cabinet, just using a little rattle can, a spray can, very tough to do, especially when the weather's kind of warm, because the lacquer tends to dry pretty quick and doesn't have a chance to really flow out nice. So as I was saying, large flat areas like this, or doing these sides, I've already started doing the front as well. It actually goes pretty quick. Areas like this, a little more time consuming. The reason it's tough to do this depressed area is something like this big felt block, kind of tough to get into the corners. So what I'll use on this is a thinner piece of felt, far more flexible, and you can work it in there. Now this one I have used mineral oil, and you can see how it's soaked into the felt, and it's actually still gummy, and I haven't used this in a long time, so if I want to get that out, I'll need to use a solvent. So where does that leave me with this cabinet? Well, so far I've spent about 2.5 hours to rub out the top and this front curved grill area. I figure I need about another 3 hours to do this shelf and the sides and the control area. And once that's done, another 4 or 5 hours to rub it all out again with a finer grade of pumice. If I'm happy with the way it looks, I'll install the chassis and record one final video. But for now, that's going to be it for this installment.